Excellencies, distinguished panelists, friends, warm greetings and welcome to this high-level event, The Future is Now, addressing multidimensional poverty for sustainable development on the sidelines of the 80th UN General Assembly. I'm Sabina Alkire from OPHI at the University of Oxford, and I'm pleased to co-moderate this event with Adriana Conconi, the Director of the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, or MPPN. Friends, we gather at a time of profound uncertainty and regnant crises. We do not know where the world will go, but we recognize the way ahead is treacherous, including for poverty. The number of precious human lives that are wrestling with social and material deprivations is fast declining, but only in some places, whereas in others it increases, and storm clouds threaten us all. This event talks about multidimensional poverty indices, or MPIs. We hear much about intersectionality and interconnections, and MPIs actually measure the different deprivations that poor people experience at the same time: ramshackle houses, hunger, low education, informal work or no work, lack of services from electricity to water to internet or social connectedness. The MPI is a premier intersectionality indicator, and the Compromiso de Sevilla, the Pact of the Future, the draft declaration of the Second World Summit of Social Development, and COP30 have all echoed an urgent call to reduce multidimensional poverty. Over 50 countries, home to over 3.5 billion people, have now launched official permanent statistics of multidimensional poverty, which are widely disaggregated and used to shape integrated policies and social protection, and to coordinate policies within and outside government. Today, you will hear from leaders all over the world share how they align their professional work with those living in poverty by using stronger, more high-resolution, multidimensional metrics, actionable and data-informed analyses, new technologies, management strategies, and policy tools. And underneath it all, in an undercurrent that might be silent, but has the greatest force of all, you will glimpse their fierce determination. It is a determination to use their brief years in office to, among other things, other professional goals, build an off-ramp from poverty that deeply disadvantaged people can and do take. Our speakers are wonderful from first to last, so we need to be very precise about timing. There will be a timer who will mention to the speakers when they have 1 minute left, and the moderator's screen will appear alongside the speaker when they have just a few seconds left. I thank each of you, our distinguished guests, for your wisdom, your vision, your hard work, and your hope. And I beg you to share your experiences concisely and with passion. We begin with welcome remarks from our esteemed host. I'm delighted to welcome Claver Gatete, Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, who is hosting our event. The Executive Secretary is an economist with a clear mind and concern for poverty, who unusually also grasps politics, having been a minister himself in multiple capacities. Your Excellency, we look forward to your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sabina. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers present, Your Excellency Nados Bekele Thomas, Chief Executive Officer of AUDA-NEPAD, Ms. Lin Yang, Deputy Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, Excellencies, distinguished ladies, good morning. It is a great honor to welcome you to this high-level side event on the future is now addressing multidimensional poverty for sustainable development, co-organized by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. I wish to begin by expressing deep appreciation to our co-organizers and esteemed partners whose dedication and collaboration have made this timely gathering possible. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we convene at a critical moment for our global community. While the world has undeniable progress in reducing extreme income poverty over the past decades, the challenge of multidimensional poverty remains immense. According to the 2024 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, 1.1 billion people across 112 countries still endure acute deprivations, from inadequate housing and poor nutrition to lack of access to education, health, energy, and livelihoods. Indeed, the UN Secretary General has often emphasized that poverty and inequality remain among the greatest global challenges of our time. Accordingly, as the United Nations marks its 80 years anniversary, eradicating poverty is a central test of its mission. For Africa, the urgency is even greater. More than 20 countries have now adopted national multidimensional poverty indices, which enables better planning, targeted social protection, and data-driven resource allocation. The example of Sierra Leone, which introduced its MPI in 2019, and Togo, which continues to actively apply its MPI, demonstrates that gains are possible, even in the harshest of contexts. But progress is awfully uneven. In the Sahel and Central Africa, for example, millions remain bound by poverty traps born out of conflict, climate vulnerability, and deprivation. If the world is to eradicate poverty, Africa cannot remain on the margins. It must be placed at the center of the solution. It is a welcome development that the Sevilla Commitment, the Pact for the Future, the draft declaration of the Second World Social Summit on Social Development, and the preparations for the COP30 all underscore that the eradication of poverty is the very foundation of peace, stability, and human dignity. In view of this, I propose 3 recommendations for your consideration. First, we must deepen the use of multidimensional poverty indices as living instruments of governance. MPIs make the invisible visible. They reveal overlapping deprivations that income measures alone cannot capture. If we fail to measure poverty in its full complexity, we cannot hope to design policies that truly transform lives. Second, we must prioritize investment in fragile and vulnerable contexts. Poverty and peace are 2 sides of the same coin. Without peace, development collapses. Without development, peace cannot endure. Financing must therefore target least developed countries and conflict-affected regions where the returns on social investment are greatest, and where a single investment in education, health, and all livelihoods can change the trajectory of an entire nation. Third, we must strengthen global solidarity and regional cooperation. The fight against poverty cannot be won by individual countries acting alone. It requires multidimensional action, innovative financing, and partnerships that leverage Africa's own resources. Institutions like ECA are championing the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area for job creation, supporting domestic resource mobilization, deepening African capital markets, and advancing the creation of an African credit rating agency. It makes no sense, for example, that African countries continue to borrow at more than 3 times the cost of other countries. Why should distorted perceptions of risk slow down the development of an entire continent? Correcting these injustices is essential if Africa is to realize its full potential. Excellencies, this gathering extends far beyond stock-taking. It's about courage, it's about solidarity, and it's about acting with urgency so that poverty, rightly described as the greatest global challenge, becomes a chapter of the past and not the story of the future. I thank you very much, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Executive Secretary, for placing Africa at the center of urgent poverty reduction, sharing encouraging examples from Sierra Leone, and proposing deeper uses, recognizing how investments in peace and poverty can just change trajectories, and advocating courageous action by regional bodies, because many hands make solidarity light work. I now turn to Yusuf Murangwa, a deep thinker with a razor-sharp mind, who, having served as the Director General of Statistics Rwanda since 2009, and under whose leadership Rwanda launched its MPI, now serves as Rwanda's Minister of Finance and Economic Planning. We look forward to your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sabina. It's good seeing you again after a long period of time. Excellency, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and all protocols observed. First of all, it's a pleasure to be part of this important discussion on multidimensional poverty indices. This is a very important discussion. I would want to emphasize that measuring poverty is very complex. And this is because the poverty phenomena itself is quite complex. So it's understandable that measuring it would not be easy. There are a number of approaches to measuring poverty. There is the income and expenditure approach. There is relative poverty considerations in some parts of the world. Then there is the multidimensional poverty approach. Whatever approach we consider, it's very important that we capture the different dimensions of poverty, because poverty is not a singular issue. It's something that it's a phenomena that has a number of dimensions, and to design policies that address poverty effectively, we need to be able to understand the different dimensions of poverty, so that the policies that we design can address the specific deprivations that our populations face. Multidimensional poverty indices are very attractive, especially for countries like Rwanda and other developing countries, because of three important aspects. First of all, from our experience, multidimensional poverty measurements are very stable. Even in periods of shocks, and also over longer periods of time when you compare to other measurements of poverty. And this is very important because it allows countries, especially in designing and tracking the effectiveness of policies over a longer period of time, to be sure that they're making progress or not making progress if that's the situation. Another important aspect of multidimensional indices in measuring poverty is that they are quite sensitive to policy interventions. For example, if there is intervention in terms of policy in education, in housing, in water, in sanitation, in health, it is possible for multidimensional poverty indices to pick that effect rather sooner than other measures of poverty. This is something that we've experienced over the last 15 years also in Rwanda. And finally, a third aspect that is very important is the ability to implement a measure even in contexts of low capacity, low resource settings. Many developing countries where poverty is very important to track have challenges with capacity, human capacity, to measure in terms of institutions, but also resources capacity in terms of financial resources to do regular interventions in terms of surveys and statistics activities. The simplicity without compromising robustness of multidimensional poverty indices makes it very attractive for countries that have low capacity, low resources to measure poverty. In Rwanda, as I said, it's now close to 15, 16, close to 17 years implementing different versions of multidimensional poverty indices. We've pegged these tools on most of our surveys, labor force surveys, demographic and health surveys, the census, and many other surveys. And it has helped us so much to track developments that have been happening over the last 15 years, and also in explaining some of the changes that we see even in other measures of poverty, like the income and expenditure approach to poverty. So I would call upon all of us to put a lot of emphasis in promoting the use of multidimensional poverty indices in most development programs, so that we are able to see that we can track what is happening in terms of reducing poverty globally, but most importantly in the global south. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, for naming poverty as not a singular issue and recognizing how measures that understand its dimensions can address the diversity of poverty conditions, how they can calm volatility, yet track long-term trends, and how MPIs respond immediately to policy changes. And especially for your last point, how they can be implemented with low institutional capacity and low financial resources. Your voice of practicality and experience across monetary and multidimensional poverty carries great weight and is an encouragement. Thank you. We now travel to Central America, and I'm delighted to welcome Yorleni León Marchena, the Minister of Human Development and Social Inclusion in Costa Rica, to reflect on Costa Rica's use of their national MPI. Costa Rica updates its MPI annually and was an early pioneer in involving the private sector as an ally in fighting poverty. Yorleni, we look forward to your sharing.
Muy buenos días, señoras y señores, y muchas gracias por la atenta invitación a este evento paralelo en el marco de la Asamblea General de la ONU. Quiero contarles que en el 2015 Costa Rica creó el Índice de Pobreza Multidimensional, un índice que es complementario a la pobreza por línea de pobreza. Así lo definimos en el país en ese momento. Este índice está a cargo del Instituto Nacional de Estadísticas y Censos, que es una instancia altamente técnica con una solvente reputación realmente impresionante. El índice se levanta a partir de información de la Encuesta Nacional de Hogares, una encuesta que se aplica todos los años en este país a partir del mes de julio y que se realiza a partir de una muestra representativa establecida por el INEC, el instituto que les mencionaba hace unos minutos. El IPM en Costa Rica lo integran 5 dimensiones, que son salud, vivienda y uso de Internet, trabajo, protección social y educación. Y estas 5 dimensiones tienen a su vez 20 indicadores. Yo quiero contarles qué ha pasado en Costa Rica a lo largo de estos casi 10 años que tenemos de medición de este índice. Del 2015 al 2024, la pobreza multidimensional en los hogares pasó de 21.8 a 10.1%. En este mismo periodo, la intensidad de la pobreza multidimensional pasó de 27.7 a 25.6%, siendo entonces más o menos entre 5 y 6 indicadores de los 20 indicadores que tienen las dimensiones, las que se encuentran todavía en rezago y que el país debe de trabajar para solucionarlas. Propiamente es el índice de pobreza multidimensional a partir de 2 variables, de las 2 que les acabo de mencionar. Para este mismo periodo ha pasado de 6 a 2.6%. A nivel de zonas rurales, nosotros realmente nos sentimos muy contentos por los datos que arroja este índice, ya que en zonas rurales los datos son aún mejores. Puedo contarles que las disminuciones en pobreza multidimensional fue mayor en 6.3% en zonas rurales con respecto al dato nacional, lo que significa que las acciones para trabajar en la corrección de esa pobreza multidimensional ha estado muy focalizada en esas zonas rurales, en esos hogares que se encuentran en zonas rurales. Ustedes sin duda comparten conmigo que estos son buenos resultados para el país. Yo no tengo duda de ello. Ahora bien, ¿qué hemos aprendido en estos 10 años a partir de la aplicación y del uso de este índice? Uno, que hoy las dimensiones y los indicadores tienen dificultades para leer acertadamente la realidad, lo que nos lleva entonces al ejercicio periódico de que es necesario estar actualizando estos índices. Y estamos hablando de un periodo muy corto, 10 años, y sentimos que ya los datos que hemos estado obteniendo en los últimos 3 años aproximadamente ya no son tan apegados a la realidad de esos hogares. Hay una dificultad. Por ejemplo, el tema de la conectividad. Hoy nosotros le preguntamos a los hogares si tiene conectividad, pero resulta hoy mucho más importante saber cuáles son las características que tiene esa conectividad, porque resulta que no es lo mismo tener conectividad fija a tener conectividad móvil, o no es lo mismo tener 5 gigas de carga y descarga a tener 100 gigas de carga y descarga, porque estas variables son las que verdaderamente facilitan el acceso, no necesariamente tener la conectividad, sino las características que tiene esa conectividad. Y esos son el tipo de lectura que sentimos que el indicador empieza a quedarse corto para poder leer esa realidad que sucede en el territorio. Entonces, hemos aprendido también que la integración del índice de pobreza multidimensional con el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo o con las políticas públicas es débil y debería de ser muchísimo más fuerte de lo que viene siendo. Y también hemos aprendido que el país tiene una abundancia de indicadores muy similares o con dimensiones que resultan ser duplicadas. Y esto entonces nos pone en un predicamento porque nos resulta en algunos casos difícil darles un tratamiento que logre generar un verdadero valor al indicador con respecto del resto de indicadores y a la inversa. Esto también lo hemos podido identificar en el país. Entonces, ¿qué estamos haciendo? El Instituto Nacional de Estadísticas y Censos está trabajando de manera conjunta con otra cantidad de instituciones e incluso con instituciones fuera del país en la actualización del IPM y esperamos va a estar listo a partir del 2026. ¿Qué vamos a hacer también? Uno, vamos a trabajar en marcos normativos que permitan fortalecer la integración del índice con el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, que ese es el instrumento más importante de cada administración una vez que toma cargo o posesión un nuevo presidente o presidenta. Y vamos a integrar o fortalecer esa integración a partir de esos marcos normativos también con política pública para darle una mayor fuerza a los resultados que arroja el índice. Y dos, vamos a trabajar en una evaluación sobre la pertinencia en términos de generación de valor público del conjunto de indicadores que hoy tiene particularmente el sector social a fin de quedarnos con aquellos indicadores que realmente logren tener una incidencia concreta en el bienestar del país. Esa ha sido nuestra breve trayectoria en ese índice que, repito, llevamos 10 años de medirlo, que ya podemos ver sus resultados y que hasta el momento estamos satisfechos de haber tomado como país la decisión de habernos adentrado a apostar por un índice con esas características. Muchísimas gracias. Buenos días.
Muchísimas gracias, ministra. Realmente hay muchos detalles muy importantes. Friends, we do not have Spanish translation, and so I will call on our colleagues to give a brief précis of the wonderful address by the minister. Please go ahead, Adri.
Yes, thank you so much for this relevant information and sharing with us the experience in Costa Rica. Just very briefly, summing up what we just heard, the MPI in Costa Rica, which has now 10 years, it's been launched 10 years ago. It has 5 dimensions and 20 indicators, and it's been a really valuable tool for monitoring and tracking poverty reduction. The minister mentioned that the headcount of monetary poverty, so that's the percentage of people living in multidimensional poverty, dropped from nearly 22% to 10% in these 10 years of tracking of poverty data, but also the intensity of poverty was also reduced from 27.7% to 25.6%. So both the the incidence and the intensity of poverty have been showing progress over the past decade, with a special progress seen in rural areas, which were the ones showing the highest levels of poverty at the beginning of the period. So this shows that policies that have been targeting these areas have been successful in really reaching out to those that are in most need in the country, in the rural areas. She mentioned also that some of the indicators of these 20 indicators included in the measure might no longer be the most accurate to accurately characterize poverty in the country, as things have been evolving. For instance, an indicator on connectivity to the internet, it was being asked whether the household had access or not. And maybe now what we need to be asking is the type of access, the frequency, how stable the connection is. And so the government is going to be going through a process of revising the different indicators included in the MPI versus a lot of indicators and data that are readily available in the country's data systems, and analyzing whether adjustments in the structure of the MPI might be needed going forward. And in parallel to that, they're going to be also reviewing normatives and regulations to make sure that the MPI is integrated into the National Development Plan, which is something that is usually done as new governments take office in the country. So I think that those were the highlights. But of course, we will also be providing summaries of the discussion after the events with more details on all of the addresses, including this one from Costa Rica. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister, and congratulations that within 15 years, Costa Rica, indeed within 10 years, Costa Rica has cut its MPI by half. And also thank you for your emphasis on the integration between the MPI and the National Development Plan and with public policy. And thank you also for stepping us towards a contemplation of having not only a multidimensional poverty measure, but also a multidimensional measure that reflects social well-being. There are a number of countries in a time where we look at going beyond GDP who are exploring having both poverty and well-being measures using the same methodology. So thank you so much. On our agenda, we now have our wonderful colleague, Ali Haider Ahmed, the Minister of Higher Education, Labour and Skills Development in Maldives. His Excellency is not able to join us at the moment. He's caught up. And so we will move on. But I wanted to mention that when His Excellency was in Uzbekistan, a pressy of our next wonderful speaker, he gave a passionate address as, at that time, Minister of Housing, Land and Urban Development, of how a small island developing state like Maldives needed to use its census to create an MPI that would enable each island, each local area to understand the face of poverty and to address it. And I wanted to recognize the small island developing states from Dominican Republic to Seychelles to Samoa for their surge of interest and determination to use multidimensional indices in their very different contexts. We are learning a great deal from them. But now I am grateful to welcome Obid Khakimov, the Director of the Center for Economic Research and Reforms under the Presidency of Uzbekistan. Obid has led the incredibly detailed process of MPI development and envisioning policy uses from the very local mahalla level to the national level. And his passion, his ability to integrate MPI reduction not only into statistical systems, but also into mainstream management strategies and institutional processes, and his quiet kindness are creating a really innovative interface. And Obid and the government of Uzbekistan hosted our most recent Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network in-person meeting in Tashkent and Bukhara. So Obid, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Sabina. Dear distinguished colleagues, esteemed participants, it's a privilege to join you today in this important gathering. So unlike other countries like Costa Rica, we are in early stage of implementing, the multidimensional poverty indices. So in recent years, Uzbekistan has embarked, the very transformative journey since 2020, the poverty reduction became one of the most top priority economic and social economic priority in Uzbekistan. So this journey not only to reduce the income poverty, but also to understand and address the poverty in its all dimensions: education, health, housing, energy, access, and the human dignity. By integrating multidimensional poverty measurements in our national development strategies, we have moved beyond narrow economic indicators and towards a more holistic understanding of well-being. If we looked at the Uzbekistan history, if we started our poverty reduction strategy in 2020, since 2021, we reduced the poverty, monetary poverty, from 17% to almost 6.8%. By the end of 2025, while during the period of this active reforms, 7.5 million people lifted out from the poverty. This progress has gone hand in hand with the rising living standards between 2017 and 2024. The wages increased by 47%. The housing, living in improved housing increased from 54% to 88%. Interestingly, it's a very, impressive change happened in the preschool education system, where access to the preschool education system was 27%. Now it's almost 80%. Higher education enrollment, it was 9%, but right now it's more than 40%. So these achievements became possible thanks to the introduction of, national poverty indicators and the targeted social programs. So according to the international institutions, Uzbekistan right now, the targeting spending almost 7% of its budget spendings on, the SDG improvements. So that we also have held the recent, the poverty forum in Namangan City last year. So on this, the third international forum of the poverty reduction, the World Bank Global Director of Poverty Reduction, Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, described Uzbekistan as a global champion in poverty reduction. So if I talk about our journey in multidimensional poverty index, so in 2023, our center, collaboration with the UNDP, OPHI, conducted a pilot project establishing national multidimensional poverty index. Since 2024, this methodology has been integrated into the regular household survey conducted by the State Statistical Agency, which is kind of annually we conduct about like 16,000 households. And since 2025, we first calculated our multidimensional poverty index. In 2024, Uzbekistan, for example, let's say if we talk about the multidimensional index, the primary drivers of the multidimensional, the poverty index are deprivations associated with informal employment, lack of financial inclusion, and educational attainment. So we also detected regional disparities. Rural areas show almost twice the level of the multidimensional poverty compared to the urban areas. Gender differences. Men and the women are classified as multidimensional poor through the intense deprivations is slightly higher among the women compared to the men. Additionally, to gain more comprehensive understanding, it was essential to compare the national results with the international assessments also, which is conducted by the OPHI. According to the global MPI in 2024, Uzbekistan's MPI value stood at 0.006. The multidimensional poverty rate was established at 1.7% of the population with an average deprivation intensity of 35.3%. So if we looked at the territorial breakdown, showed that 2.3% of the rural population and 1.1% of the urban population were multidimensionally poor. Only 0.24% of the Uzbekistan's population is at risk of extreme poverty. So as President Mirziyoyev noted that improving infrastructure and the living situations and creating favorable living conditions in the regions have become the key step in reducing our multidimensional poverty. To this end, infrastructure is actively being improved in disadvantaged areas, home to, and this year we alone, the 470,000 households gained access to the clean water, and the 790,000 household gain access improved electricity supplies. So at the global forum recently held in Uzbekistan, our President Shavkat Mirziyoyev put forward several initiatives aimed at strengthening the international response to the poverty. So using this platform, I would like to say about these initiatives, and I think that this will be very helpful internationally to reduce the poverty in multidimensional levels. So the first one is introduction of a requirement to incorporate poverty reduction in the financing of the large infrastructure projects in developing countries by international financial institutions. Second one is establishing a new financial architecture to combat the poverty that would mobilize over 4 trillion needed by developing countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Holding a high-level conference in 2026 in the ancient city Hiva with the participation of international financial institutions, donor organizations, and the partner states to develop new approach to finance poverty reductions. So in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that Uzbekistan is committed to continuing reforms and working together with the international partners to ensure sustainable poverty reduction. So the last thing I would like to mention that regarding to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2018, Uzbekistan took the obligation to reduce the poverty, monetary poverty, by twice by 2030. So since 2020, Uzbekistan already fully completed its obligations by the SDG, and the president announced a new milestone that by 2030, Uzbekistan fully will abolish absolute poverty in Uzbekistan, and our poverty reduction policy will be directed only in multidimensional, the poverty reduction policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Obid, for that incredibly informative, detail-oriented, and yet with an overarching arch of imagination at sharing your experience, and particularly for drawing attention to very concrete policies like levels of education and overarching commitments like budget allocation to the SDGs. The Poverty Forum that Obid mentioned in Nammangan last week is indeed something that is very inspiring, because we need champions like Uzbekistan with its president, with you, Obid, to urge others to take initiative, to rally their imaginations and lead their actions, putting poverty reduction into infrastructure investments, into the financial architecture, having a high-level conference on poverty reduction and its finance next year. And I think that many people are ambitious, but few are ambitious, or as ambitious as you in Uzbekistan, at reducing poverty. And so I salute you as global champions of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sabina.
I would have been very delighted to welcome Pak Sua, the Vice Minister of Finance in Indonesia, who was one of the key founding makers of Indonesia's national team for the acceleration of poverty reduction, and an intellectual force for envisioning how the MPI could improve cost-effective social protection and garner whole-of-government support. He also is a professor of economics at the University of Indonesia, but alas, he's been called into a closed meeting. So I just want to salute the work which is ongoing under his leadership in Indonesia, especially a great deal of consultation about what an MPI would mean in Indonesia, about how finance might be aligned with it, and how it might be communicated alongside the other metrics that the very sophisticated BPS, the Statistics Department of Indonesia, releases. So we look forward very much to his joining next time. And I would also want to recognize very much Claudia Maldonado, who is the coordinator of evaluation and policy in the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, INEGI, in Mexico. She, like Baksua, is an academic. She's also worked on early childhood development, something that Obid also drew to our attention. And she has also was earlier in Coneval, the institution that pioneered the first MPI of Latin America and of the world in 2009. So she is not yet with us, and so we look forward again to her remarks. So at this moment, it's my delight to turn over moderation to Adriana Conconi. Adriana directs the MPPN and is a truly able and expert colleague. She's a rare breed who can undertake technical computations of multidimensional poverty and teach others all of the intricacies. She's led the global MPI. She can grasp the implications of policy metrics and convey these to high-level actors and correspond promptly with precision and kindness to colleagues and strangers alike. And she also has a wonderful memory for all of the ways that all of you are advancing work to reduce poverty. So we're honored to have her at the helm. Adriana.
Thank you so much, Sabina, and thanks to all the participants and the interventions we've heard so far. We'll now be hearing from Dr. Bartolomeo Arma, Senior Economist Advisor to the CEO at the African Union Development Agency, who will share the experience from the African countries and how a multidimensional approach to poverty can bring light to deprivations that might be hidden with traditional monetary metrics, with particular focus on how they can serve as policy tools as African countries continue their efforts toward poverty eradication, leaving no one behind. So, Dr. Arma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm representing the Nardos Bekele, the CEO of AUDA-NEPAD, who, for unforeseen circumstances, could not make this event. So I'll share some of her perspectives as she's and deliver her remarks. Distinguished guests, colleagues, the theme of this event, The Future is Now, is a daily reality for over 500 million Africans experiencing the interlinked deprivations of multidimensional poverty in health, education, and living standards. Yet there is hope. According to your own report, 7 of the 10 countries making the fastest progress in reducing multidimensional poverty are in sub-Saharan Africa. So what does it take to fight multidimensional poverty from our perspective? First, a data-driven approach allows for targeted policies that tackle MPI deprivations head-on. For instance, through targeted investments in rural electrification, clean cooking fuel, extensive sanitation construction investments, and financial inclusion, India demonstrated that interventions that directly attack the core indicators of MPI can lift a vast majority of the people out of poverty quickly. Secondly, integrated approaches that address the underlying causes as opposed to the symptoms of MPI are critical. For instance, this also involves understanding the interlinkages among the different MPI indicators and then applying policies that have knock-on effects. For example, improving access to clean water and energy has positive knock-on effects on health, education, and employment. So it's addressing some of the basic needs and how they interrelate and interact with other indicators so that you have an optimal effect and optimal and cost-effective effect. Examples include Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net Program and Ghana's Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty Program. Third, through poverty-focused development plans that are linked to national budgets and underpinned by robust monitoring and evaluation frameworks. These are critical to keep an eye on the dial to see how progress is unfolding and also to ensure that resources go to areas of priority. We at NEPAD, AUDA-NEPAD, are translating these lessons into action. We have embedded the drivers of MPI in Africa's second 10-year implementation plan, which is the Agenda 2063, and are supporting member states to align their national development plans to the second 10-year plan, as well as to the SDGs under what we call the 2 agendas, 1 plan framework. This is key to ensuring that these interventions are prioritized for funding and tracked. We are reinforcing these national level interventions and reinforcing their impact and effectiveness through regional initiatives that enhance the interoperability of national systems, harmonize standards within the region, reduce costs through pool procurement, and promote employment through local production and value addition. You'll recall that during the COVID pandemic, several African countries could not access vaccines as single procurers at national level. So at the regional level, this is critical in terms of pooling our resources to ensure that unit costs are lowered, and in areas even including for health and education. Allow me to elaborate on a few of these regional initiatives. On health, in collaboration with the African Medicines Agency, we are enhancing the continent's capacity to standardize pharmaceutical regulations and manufacture essential medicines locally. This milestone reduces dependency on imports and strengthens Africa's self-reliance in health security. Currently, almost 90% of our health medicines are imported, which makes us vulnerable to external shocks. With respect to infrastructure, through initiatives like PIDA, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, we are prioritizing regional energy, transport, and ICT projects to connect farmers to markets and students to digital learning. We're also supporting the industrialization of Africa through special economic zones and programs like the 100 million SMME initiative, which leverages AI to promote entrepreneurship among youth and women. However, Africa cannot do this alone. The scale of our ambition demands a scale of partnership that matches it. We therefore call on our development partners to scale up concessional financing to de-risk and crowd in the private sector through blended finance mechanisms. Secondly, to support the fight against illicit financial flows. Africa loses more to these flows than it receives in aid. We need global cooperation on tax fairness and the return of stolen assets to finance our own development. Excellencies and distinguished guests, the future is now. It is a future where poverty is not a defining feature of Africa, but a relic of its past. By investing in our people and planet and forging partnerships of mutual respect, we can turn this future into our present reality. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arma, for such inspiring words, especially your call for redefining progress beyond GDP and for highlighting how Africa is moving toward inclusive and integrated metrics in line with the Agenda 2063. Even as countries in the continent continue to experience some real challenges, as you pointed out, it's very encouraging to see regional leadership embracing multidimensional poverty tools, not just for measurement, but for guiding policy and resilience strategies, and emphasizing the need for, as you were mentioning, regional cooperation and partnerships as countries continue to implement measures tailored to their national needs. Now we will turn to Vior Sancher, Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. DESA has long been a key player in global policy coordination, working to ensure that data on poverty goes beyond income and includes dimensions like education, health, living standards, and many more. DESA supports countries in integrating these multidimensional measures into SDG follow-ups and policy frameworks. And so we are very looking forward to Vior's address.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thanks to ECA for bringing us together and for the previous speakers for great remarks. I will try to add my part to the discussion. So distinguished colleagues and participants, I am very honored to join this panel on behalf of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or DESA as we call ourselves, to share some perspectives on how multidimensional poverty measures can inform effective and coordinated policies. So in addition to thanking the ECA, the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, and OPHI for convening this important high-level discussion and for bringing together senior officials to share experiences and lessons learned. As we've heard so eloquently from the previous speakers, we know that poverty is not a uniform experience. It remains one of the most complex and pressing challenges facing the world today. So while income poverty captures part of the picture, millions of people experience multiple interlinked deprivations across education, health, housing, basic living standards. So recognizing those dimensions is critical. So having policies that focus narrowly on income alone risks overlooking people who remain vulnerable in essential aspects of life. And I would like to reference some data from the 2024 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, which tell us that more than 1.1 billion people live in acute multidimensional poverty. More than half of that 1.1 billion are children. And almost 40% live in conflict-affected countries, where vulnerability is compounded. And the highest concentration of multidimensional poverty remains in sub-Saharan Africa. So to address these complex realities requires tailored, context-specific strategies that reach the most disadvantaged and accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And as we've also heard from previous speakers, multidimensional poverty indices provide a powerful lens for understanding and addressing these realities. They reveal patterns and overlaps of deprivation that income measures alone can't capture. They allow policymakers to identify not only those living in poverty, but how they are experiencing poverty, which dimensions require urgent attention, and where interventions can have the greatest impact. Sometimes we hear that these multidimensional poverty indices can be a bit abstract. We've heard good examples from previous speakers, and I would like to reference some examples of how MPIs have informed policy design and resource allocation. So we've seen, for example, that in countries where national MPI data are disaggregated by subnational regions, governments can prioritize interventions in areas with the highest deprivation, ensuring that social protection programs do reach those most in need. My second example is how MPIs are increasingly used to monitor progress over time and to evaluate the effectiveness of intersectoral strategies, helping governments adjust interventions and allocate resources more efficiently. So by identifying overlapping deprivations, multidimensional measures also encourage coordination across sectors, ensuring that social protection, education, health, and economic policies work together for greater impact. Dear colleagues, at DESA, we support member states and the UN system in harnessing MPI data for evidence-based planning. Multidimensional poverty measurement complements other statistical tools and helps track progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring that no one is left behind. And let me briefly just mention that we are supporting the working high-level expert group on Beyond GDP. Very interesting discussions that I encourage everyone on this call to look out for. So, dear colleagues, let me wrap up by mentioning the upcoming Second World Summit for Social Development. It will be held in Qatar, 4th to 6th of November. It will provide an important platform for reaffirming our collective commitment to comprehensive poverty reduction strategies and to advance innovative solutions to address multidimensional poverty globally. So multidimensional poverty measures are not just analytical tools, they are instruments for action. So I encourage all partners to continue to share and to learn from each other so we can scale best practices to expand impact. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, thank you so much, Ms. Chancellor, for setting out the global framework and emphasizing how measurement, policy coordination, and the inclusion of diverse deprivations are essential for leaving no one behind, including this call to action at the end to continue to be engaged and committed to these discussions, and also the reminder of the meeting in Qatar in November, which will be also a relevant forum for more discussions on this and a renewed commitment on this agenda. Next, we will have Lin Yang, Deputy Executive Secretary at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP. ESCAP has been instrumental in the Asia-Pacific region in promoting disaggregation on multidimensional poverty metrics, highlighting vulnerabilities among rural, island, and indigenous populations in the region. And they've also supported several national efforts to localize poverty indices and integrate them into planning processes. Lynn, please take the floor.
Thank you, Adriana, and also Sabina for moderating this session. Your Excellency, dear Executive Secretary Claver of the Economic Commission for Africa, Excellencies, distinguished participants. It's really a great pleasure to attend this high-level side event on behalf of your ESCAP Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific on the margins of the UN General Assembly and the share regional perspective. So the message today I would like to bring here is that we are very proud of the strides Asia-Pacific region has made in eradicating extreme poverty. At the same time, we recognize that Asia-Pacific region remains off track in attaining Sustainable Development Goal 1. At the higher poverty lines measuring moderate poverty, our region continues to have the largest number of poor people. Millions more live too close to poverty lines and they remain highly vulnerable to shocks, including those caused by climate change. So this is the message I would like to bring to today's session. That's why the Pact of the Future recognizes poverty in all forms and dimensions as the greatest global challenge. And that is eradication is seen as an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. Be informed by rigorous analysis. In this regard, as many speakers already highlighted, the Multidimensional Poverty Index is a robust tool. So let me also, along with the other speakers, highlight several key strengths of the MPI by drawing the experiences from our region. The number one is that MPI provides a multidimensional understanding of poverty. It captures the deprivation in education, health, nutrition, and the living standards, reflecting the complexity of those living in poverty. Second is MPI aligns with the global development priorities. It's closely aligned with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and relates directly to human capital and development, which are long-term determinants of economic prosperity and the social progress. Number three is that MPI adapts to local context. I think that is why many countries, by listening to the speakers who embrace this index, countries can tailor the global framework to reflect their unique realities, making poverty measurement more relevant and responsive. With the multiple rounds of surveys, they can assess progress over time, identify areas where gains could be accelerated or where worrying trends must be reversed. Number four is that MPI strengthens regional analysis and comparability. ESCAP, we as the regional commission, has 53 member states, covering more than 60% of the global population and representing a very, very diverse group of countries, including LDC, LDCCs, and middle-income countries. MPI offers the strength as a regionally comparable measure of poverty and is therefore frequently referred in our analytical work. Number five is that MPI is synergistic with the tools developed by ESCAP. For instance, our most liked Leaving No One Behind platform disaggregates SDG indicators to capture the intersectionality of the circumstances. Powered by machine learning algorithm, it identified the furthest behind the groups across 19 SDG indicators in 33 countries at both national and subnational levels. Because of the Leaving No One Behind the platform uses the same data sources as the MPI, we can harness strong synergies to support integrated and inclusive policy design, as well as effective monitoring and evaluation. So looking ahead, ASCAP will continue to advance inclusive evidence and action in the Asia-Pacific region. Building on recent progress, we will feature a regional MPI analysis in our flagship report, Social Outlook for Asia and the Pacific 2026. In collaboration with the DESA and the ECA, we're also exploring how social protection can reduce multidimensional poverty with the country-level insights, including in Maldives. We aim to deepen this work and expand the cross-regional partnerships to strengthen support for member states through innovative, data-driven tools that promote inclusive and actionable policy solution. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm also very keen to hear other speakers. Yeah, thank you so much. The floor is back to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Ms. Lin, for your powerful reflections on Asia-Pacific's varied challenges, but also the importance of tailor-made, localized measurement tools, highlighting that even with great progress in poverty reduction in the region, some challenges remain to meet SDG 1 by 2030, and how MPIs can bring new information aligned with national priorities and the 2030 agenda. And also for highlighting how multidimensional measures can lead the way for further poverty reduction as we incorporate new data tools, innovative data tools, and new technologies that are now available to us to measure and monitor poverty trends and make sure that we leave no one behind. Next, we'll hear from Claudia Valenzuela, Vice Minister for Policy, Planning and Evaluation at the Ministry of Social Development in Guatemala. Guatemala has also been working toward more multidimensional approaches to poverty. They have a national MPI, which they have updated over the last few years, especially trying to reach silos of poverty in the country, including indigenous populations, and combining social development, planning, and evaluation tools to capture deprivations beyond income. Vice Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana. Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm very thankful for this space to represent the Ministry of Social Development and to share Guatemala's experience in the fight against poverty. For us, reducing multidimensional poverty is more than just a statistical goal. It is a national priority and an ethical commitment to our people and human dignity. A decade ago, our country measured poverty almost exclusively based on income, but it was just in 2018 that we moved towards creating the Guatemalan Multidimensional Poverty Index, and updated in 2024 with the latest living conditions survey. It is comprised of 17 indicators that are relevant to address the social and economic complexities in Guatemala. The results were clear and compelling. 57.7% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty. Among those who are poor, the intensity of the deprivation reaches 45.1%, which means that we're not talking about a single deprivation, but rather several accumulated in the same household. Poverty in Guatemala also has a marked territorial and ethnic dimension. In rural areas, the incidence reaches up to 76.3%, compared to 40.8% in urban areas. Among the Mayan population, which is half of our population, 3 out of 4 people live in multidimensional poverty. These figures speak to historical inequalities that we must address with differentiated and culturally relevant policies. Faced with this reality, the Ministry of Social Development has promoted a second major advance, which is the creation of the Social Household Registry. This census is now the backbone of our social policy, as it allows each household to be identified with updated administrative and statistical information. For us, the Social Household Registry is not just a database. It is the bridge that connects the evidence from the MPI with the concrete actions to social programs. The registry as a whole provides relevant data for designing policies and strategies that promote mobility and social cohesion. And this has a special significance for the provision of services, as it depoliticizes decisions about beneficiaries in a country with a history where social programs used to be a corruption instrument. It equates the supply of our services with demand and requires state institutions to act together and assume responsibility for citizens' rights. With that in mind, it has led the government of Guatemala to implement the hand-in-hand strategy, mano a mano in Spanish, which seeks to coordinate the actions of different ministries to address specific deprivations. A concrete example of this is the declaration of dirt floors-free municipalities, a policy that improves the health, housing, and dignity of the poorest families. This effort would be unthinkable without the ability to identify with accuracy which households still face specific deprivations. And beyond describing what we have done, I would also like to highlight what the MPI offers us as a strategic horizon for the future. First, it provides us with a territorial targeting framework. This allows us to design differentiated intervention packages, avoiding the one-size-fits-all solutions that do not respond to local realities. And second, it strengthens interinstitutional coordination. No single ministry can solve multidimensional poverty, but if we all use the same compass, we can align health, education, housing, labor, and infrastructure budgets to jointly address deprivations. The index then becomes a common language that facilitates partnerships and multiplies impact. Guatemala has made significant progress, from income to multidimensionality, from statistic to an administrative platform, from snapshots to actually zooming in for concrete action. Our challenge now is to consolidate this progress, expand the coverage of the registry and of mano a mano, perfect the use of the MPI in planning, and ensure that every public policy translates into fewer deprivations and more opportunities for our people. With evidence, strategy, and partnerships, Guatemala can transform the lives of millions of people. That is the commitment that we hold as the government of Guatemala. Thank you. Gracias and mal Dios.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much to Vice Minister Valenzuela for sharing Guatemala's effort directly connected to preserving dignity among Guatemalans. It's really powerful to see how multidimensional poverty tools are being applied to better reach populations that have often been left behind, and that connects directly with the spirit and the vision of the 2030 agenda, including indigenous groups that represent such a large proportion of the population in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is really inspiring work. And also how she highlighted how the MPI could serve as a strong governance and accountability tool for different agencies within the government, and as a coordination tool across multiple ministries and agencies in government. We will now pass it to Claudia Maldonado, coordinator of evaluation and policy at the National System of Statistical and Geographical Information, the Institute of Statistics at INEGI in Mexico. We are delighted that she was able to join us. And as Sabina was mentioning before, Mexico was a pioneer when it launched its national multidimensional poverty measure in 2009 and led the way for many other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean and other regions of the world to also start embarking in this journey. And so their experience is, of course, incredibly rich, and we look forward to learning more from the Mexican experience.
Thank you so much. It is an honor for me to participate in this very important space. As Adriana mentioned, I will start with giving you some feedback, some background on the Mexican measure. As a result of the General Law of Social Development of 2004, Mexico was the first country in the world to adopt a public, official, periodic, transparent, and replicable measure of multidimensional poverty. By law, this poverty measure is implemented every 2 years at the national and state levels of aggregation and every 5 years at the municipal or local level with information sources produced by INEGI, the National Institutes for Statistics and Geography. This measure was originally developed with some of you colleagues that are here now in close dialogue with specific academic specialists in order to provide a robust, credible, and reliable measure for public policy improvement with a very innovative poverty measure based on income and the social rights of education, healthcare, social security, dignified housing, and proper nutrition. In addition to this, the Mexican poverty measure includes territorial indicators of social cohesion and access to roads. Last July, the functions of poverty measurement and the evaluation of social development policy were transferred to the National Institute for Statistics and Geography, INEGI, after the elimination of the National Council for the Evaluation of Social Development Policy, known as CONEVAL. On August 13th, at INEGI, we released the official multidimensional poverty data using the same methodology, the same criteria and transparency measures established originally by CONEVAL. In this very critical juncture of constitutional change amidst uncertainty, we have some core lessons to reflect upon. First, the continuation of a rigorous and transparent measurement in a new institutional setting has been possible due to an explicit mandate, public and well-established procedures historically implemented by CONEVAL according to best practice, and the continuation of the highly skilled technical team that was responsible for poverty measurement at CONEVAL and joined the ranks of INEGI to continue this mission. This, I must say, is one of the highlights of Mexican bureaucracy, and I am very proud to tell you that this team joined my team at INEGI and is performing the same functions that they have historically performed with excellence. Second, multidimensional poverty went down from 43.2% of the population in 2016, which is the beginning of the comparable series, to 29.6% in 2024, including extreme poverty, and there is relative improvement of all the indicators of access to social rights, such as education, health, social security, nutrition, and housing. Nevertheless, and I want to be very emphatic, Mexico has not been able to recover from a terrible setback in access to health since 2018, nor overcome a long history of violation of social rights in the form of exclusion. Today, 7 million people continue to live in extreme poverty, and structural sources of inequality and development gaps associated with location, race, ethnicity, and gender prevail. Furthermore, the prevalence of poverty is comparatively higher at earlier stages of life, with very worrisome implications for life cycles and trajectories among those who are born and raised in poverty, with an accumulation of disadvantages. Third, with the multidimensional poverty measure, we are in a better position to tackle complex development problems with evidence-informed decision-making and public debates anchored in credible data. These data, unfortunately, still show that we are far from achieving the goal of leaving no one behind, and that decisive improvements in policy and strategy are needed to advance social rights for all. I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for sharing Mexico's experience. It was a bit of a history lesson as we are talking about 16 years of multidimensional poverty measurement, leading the way for countries around the world to implement their own national MPIs. And we even have today James Foster, which is, of course, the co-author or co-developer of the Alkire-Foster method jointly with Sabina, who has also very graciously joined us today for our event. And he's also here, and he was directly involved in the development of the multidimensional measure in Mexico back in 2009. We're very honored to have him here, of course. Claudia, it was also inspiring to hear how even through political and institutional changes and reforms that happened in Mexico over these 16 years, multidimensional poverty has been institutionalized in such a way that it has managed to continue to be tracked, monitored, and be relevant for policy use, which is the main objective, right, of these measures. So thank you so much for sharing this experience, and also for very candidly sharing some of the challenges that the country is facing, which are, of course, similar to what other countries might also be experiencing. Now we will turn to Matias Cosiña, Acting Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of Social Development and Family of Chile, who will share their experience. As many of you know, Chile introduced an official MPI in 2015 in collaboration with OPHI and with a very strong technical poverty commission that was involved in the design and the implementation of the national MPI. And they have subsequently expanded the measure to include a new dimension on social networks and cohesion. The country has reduced the MPI headcount significantly over the past decade and is now updating the methodology to include new deprivations that are more accurately characterize poverty now. And these changes reflect how Chile regards the MPI both as a statistical tool, but also as a platform for policy and public dialogue. So Matias, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished Executive Secretary Claver Gatete, Directors Adriana Conconi and Sabina Alkire, Excellencies, colleagues from OPHI, MPPN and ECA, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to take the floor on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development and Family of Chile to share our experience with the Multidimensional Poverty Index. As Adriana was mentioning, Chile's journey with the MPI began more than a decade ago. In 2015, after 2 years of work, the country introduced an official MPI developed in collaboration with OPHI and based on the recommendations from a Presidential Commission on Poverty Measurement. From the outset, the aim was to reveal deprivations that income alone could not capture in education, health, work and social security, and housing. A couple of years later, a fifth dimension was introduced to the index aimed at capturing how deprivations in social networks and social cohesion also contribute to poverty. The decision to introduce an MPA was pivotal. Since 2009, the share of households living in multidimensional poverty as measured by the original 4-dimension index, which is the longest series, has been cut almost in half, from 21.7% to 11.5% in 2022. Under the 5-dimension measure, the rate for that last year, for 2022, was 13.4%, which shows that this fifth dimension raises actually the bar for the index. After a decade of implementation, we can say that the MPI is now part of the statistical landscape in Chile. And more importantly, it is viewed as a relevant tool to understand the deprivations that many households face, even if they are not classified as poor under the traditional income-based metric. The two measures combined offer a more complete picture. In fact, in 2022, over 85% of those identified as multidimensionally poor were not considered poor under the income poverty measure. The regional distribution of poverty shown by both measures is also very different. The MPI has also allowed us to monitor progress in a way that resonates with citizens' life experiences. In that sense, the MPI has become not only a statistical tool, but also a platform for dialogue between evidence and policy. though applying it more systematically to policy design and evaluation remains a challenge for the country. With that in mind, developing reliable local level estimates of the index and its components will be key in years to come. Today, Chile is entering a new stage. In 2023, President Gabriel Boric convened a new presidential commission of experts to update the country's poverty measures. Following its proposals and with the technical support of UNDP, the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, we are now validating a redesigned MPI. OPHI has also provided valuable feedback during this process. This new version of the MPI will most likely raise the standards that the country imposes on itself in terms of poverty measurement. The Commission's proposal retains the 5 dimensions currently in use while expanding the number of indicators from 15 to 20. It adds new elements to the measure, such as food insecurity, informal employment, the burden of care work within households, and the lack of digital connectivity, among other deprivations, reflecting new social needs and setting a higher standard. This process highlights 4 lessons we would like to share with you briefly this morning. First, poverty is not static. As societies change, our ways of measuring it must evolve. This is why regular reviews are essential. Second, to strengthen the use of the MPI in public policy design and evaluation, the greatest possible territorial disaggregation is needed, both for the index and for each of its dimensions. Third, when updating or implementing an MPI, a high-level institutional framework provides strong foundations for the measure to be sustainable across time and across administrations. And finally, international cooperation is indispensable. The dialogue within the MPPN, the technical guidance from OPHI, the support from UN agencies, and the global visibility of the MPI have been vital for Chile's successful experience. We remain committed to giving back by sharing the lessons we have learned along the way. Looking ahead, our main challenge is to implement and communicate this new methodology while continuing to push for measurement to translate into policy, because, as we all know, an index is only as powerful as the policies it informs and the lives it helps to transform. Let me conclude by reaffirming Chile's commitment to the common endeavor of measuring and addressing multidimensional poverty. We see the MPI as a living tool that keeps us accountable to the promise of the 2030 Agenda, that no one will be left behind. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Matthias, for that rich presentation. It's really wonderful to see Chile evolving its MPI, not just in breadth of dimensions and indicator, but also in using it for policy evaluation and territorial disaggregation, making the measure more sensitive and more representative of the lived experience of the poor in the country. Now we'll hear from Zuzana Brzyziowa-Szwidrowski, Director of Gender, Poverty and Social Policy at the UN Economic Commission for Africa. ECA has been supporting countries to refine multidimensional poverty indicators with particular attention to gender deprivations and how policy can respond to overlapping vulnerabilities and to using the data for monitoring and social protection design. Zuzana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is an honor for the ECA to be co-hosting this event together with Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and with the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. At the outset, let me also express special thanks to our Poverty and Social Policy team for co-organizing this event and also for accompanying analytical work. We believe it is the start of a long-term partnership that will benefit Africa and its people. It has been insightful to hear perspective of so many distinguished leaders who prioritize reducing poverty in all its forms everywhere. Personally, I have learned a lot from their interventions. Let me also reiterate that the second World Summit on Social Development in November provides us a great opportunity to build consensus on accelerating poverty reduction in Africa and beyond. Reiterating what our Executive Secretary said, we must build on significant achievements so far and reaffirm that lasting peace and sustainable development are both precondition but also a consequence of success in fighting against poverty, and hence cannot be separated from it. Allow me now to turn to several important success stories to share from Africa. Some African countries, for example, Eswatini, Ethiopia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Togo, to name a few, have made rapid progress in reducing the incidence of multidimensional poverty over the last decade or so. For example, Liberia reduced its headcount ratio between 2007 and 2020 from 81 to 52%, which represents 29 percentage point reduction in absolute terms and also nearly a 36% reduction in relative terms. Rwanda too has done remarkably well in reducing poverty in all its forms, as we have heard from the Honorable Minister. It reduced the incidence of the global MPI by 31 percentage points between 2010 and 2020. Other countries have made the fastest progress in reducing the number of people living in multidimensional poverty, and they include Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, just to name a few. For example, between 2011 and 2018, Morocco reduced its headcount ratio from 17 to 8%, and it is more than halving the percentage of its population that was living in multidimensional poverty, and of course from already relatively low level. Some LDCs, least developing countries in Africa, are making commendable progress in reducing multidimensional poverty. Sierra Leone and Togo have reduced both the number of MPI poor and also extreme poor as per $3 a day as measured by the World Bank during the last 2 decades. And finally, progress with selected SDGs and poverty indicators is also being made. Several African countries will have halved the global MPI by 2030, which is the indicator 1.2, and the examples are São Tomé, Príncipe, and Sierra Leone. However, as we all know, and was mentioned on others, important challenges for Africa continue. Unfortunately, a number of least developed countries remain trapped in a reinforcing cycle of conflict, extreme weather conditions, and stubbornly high or even rising poverty. As a result of these events and due to rapid population growth, instead of poverty reduction, the number of people living in multidimensional poverty has increased in many least developed countries. Same applies to extreme poverty, again measured by $3 a day. To give one example where this is the case, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, around 10 million people became multidimensionally poor between 2007 to 2018 alone. Clearly, the number has only increased with the onset of COVID and subsequent cascading crises, some of which actually last till today, including cost of living crisis. The number of people living below poverty, below the extreme poverty line of $3 in DRC increased at a similar rate. This brings me to conclusion, which is a call for collective action. Today and in the past, we have witnessed inspiring success stories in Africa and other regions on how poverty reduction and even eradication is possible. China and India lead the way globally, and several African countries have also done remarkably well. It is time to celebrate and also learn from these success stories. We at the ECA hope that together with the partners present, we can act together as one voice and provide actionable solutions to African countries, in particular and others. At the ECA, together with our partners and the wider UN system, we stand ready to support African countries in this endeavor through these actions, developing robust national multidimensional poverty indices to guide policies and that are tailored to their context, and with a special attention to marginalized groups, in particular gender, women, and young people. We also want to conduct policy-relevant research on poverty and the interlinkages with climate, conflict, and migration. We aim to provide cutting-edge policy tools for governments and help them design policies that will reduce national MPIs with employment generation and efficient social protection programs, but also with carefully targeted industrial policies. And most importantly, we aim to facilitate implementation of these policies. Thank you again and for the opportunity and for your attention.
Thank you, Susanna, for underlying how countries in Africa are using multidimensional measures to better capture the experience of those living in poverty, sharing some success stories of how this is working out in several countries in the continent, but also highlighting how for several least developed countries, poverty is actually increasing in context of recent conflict, and where there's a need for collaboration to change this trend and support these countries in their poverty eradication efforts. So with that, we conclude this rich round of interventions from leaders across regions and institutions. We have heard a wide range of perspectives, from global frameworks to country innovations, from regional commissions to national ministries, all reinforcing that multidimensional poverty is both a measurement challenge, but also an opportunity for better and more effective policy design. As we close this session, let us take a moment to reflect on some of the key messages that emerged in this discussion. First, we have seen how countries and institutions are pioneering new approaches to measure poverty in all its forms, whether through Africa's Agenda 2063 vision of dignity-based progress and making the invisible visible, with the sense of urgency stressed by ECA's Executive Secretary, Ms. Gatete, and building regional partnerships as countries continue to implement national measures, as also highlighted by Dr. Arma from NEPAD. We've heard from Costa Rica's success in reducing both the incidence and intensity of multidimensional poverty and the relevance of integrating the MPI to the National Development Plan. Uzbekistan's initial efforts and commitment to implementing a national MPI to be integrated into their comprehensive poverty monitoring strategy, emphasizing also the relevance of disaggregation by gender, which can reveal pockets of poverty. Guatemala's focus on indigenous populations, Mexico's strong institutional framework and integration of their national multidimensional measure with their broader statistical system, Chile's expansion of its index to capture newly relevant deprivations to keep the MPI as an accurate and effective measure to characterize poverty and guide policy, and ESCAP and ECA's regional support for disaggregated measures that can become true policy tools. These experiences show us that multidimensional poverty measurement is not a niche exercise. It has become part of the mainstream statistical and policy landscape around the world. At the same time, our discussion also highlighted that challenges remain. As Minister Murangwa from Rwanda stressed, measuring poverty is a complex task, as poverty itself is a complex phenomenon, a point that was also made by Ms. Shangshare from UNDESA. Data disaggregation, sustainability of institutional frameworks, and most importantly, the translation of measurement into effective policy that transforms lives are tasks that require persistent and mostly political will. Poverty is dynamic, and so our measurement of poverty, our tracking of poverty must also evolve. If we stop innovating, we risk leaving new forms of deprivations invisible. And this was also a point stressed by several panelists today of how to incorporate new data tools and new technologies for poverty tracking. But today we also heard a clear message of opportunity and possibility. We live in a moment where technology, data integration, international cooperation give us tools that previous generations did not have. From big data and geospatial mapping to community-level surveys, participatory methods, we can innovate in how we identify, understand, and respond to poverty around the world. And we need a renewed commitment, a commitment to invest in robust and adaptive measure systems which allow disaggregation to monitor poverty for subpopulation groups, learning from each other's experiences and building a true sense of cooperation, partnerships, and solidarity, as was shared by several of the panelists today. Also, commitment to use these measures systematically in public policy, budgeting and monitoring, and to strengthen governance. As discussed today, multidimensional poverty measures are sensitive to targeted policy interventions and can help monitor progress and also identify deprivations that are stickier, that are proving harder to address. And finally, we need commitment to keep this agenda at the center of our efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda, but also going beyond. Because the promise to leave no one behind must be a guide action for everyone, for every country around the world, especially at a time of increased uncertainty and tensions around the world, as very well pointed out by Sabina in her opening remarks. So let us leave today this discussion inspired by the progress, conscious of the remaining gaps and challenges, but determined to work together with creativity, with rigor, with solidarity. Multidimensional poverty is complex, but it's not impossible to address. With shared knowledge and collective will, we can move closer to an inclusive world where every person enjoys the dignity, security, and opportunities that they deserve. So let me just close by thanking our panelists for such a rich and engaging discussion, the participants online, and especially ECA for the continued partnership with OPHI and the MPPN, and for co-hosting this event. We look forward to meaningful and even deeper collaborations in the future. Thank you all very much for joining us today.